Welcome to the channel. Today we are visiting Bendigo Cemetery, and our visit will concentrate on the original historic area where some of Bendigo's earliest residents were laid to rest. And we are visiting what I believe is the final resting place of an Irish convict who was transported to Van Diemen's Land in 1841. We'll also journey to Back Creek, where she lived in appalling conditions and ultimately died a wretched death in 1873. Her name was Anne Ward. Anne was born in Ireland in 1824, and at the age of 16, she was arrested for theft alongside her mother and two women named Margaret and Anne Lawless. The group had sought lodgings at the home of a man named Bernard Smith in a place called Tangenmore. Apologies if I have pronounced that wrong, Tangenmore. They stayed for 4 days, but on the 5th morning, Bernard awoke to find that a banknote, a promissory note valued at £4, 5 shillings, 6 pence, 1 sovereign and a small box were missing. The incident was reported in the Newry Telegraph on the 19th of January 1841. Bernard was described in the article as a very old, mean-looking fellow. All the women were found guilty and sentenced to 7 years transportation. Now, I'm unsure what happened to Anne's mother. There was another Anne Ward listed on the same convict ship, and I initially thought she might have been Anne Senior. However, it turns out she was convicted for a separate offence on an earlier date, so I don't believe she was Anne's mother. But if you have any more information about this, please let us know in the comments. Anne had 2 prior convictions, both for stealing clothes, and she had already served a total of 10 months in prison for those offences. The women remained in prison for several months before being transferred to the Richmond Female Penitentiary in North Dublin. There they awaited the arrival of the vessel designated to transport them to their destination, the Mexborough, which was to dock at Kingstown Harbour. There is an excellent article about the voyage of the Mexborough from Ireland to Van Diemen's Land, written by a Brian Rieusset. Apologies, Brian, if I have pronounced your surname wrong. Now, he provides a detailed account of the journey, and the article can be accessed via the link below that I've left in the description. Here is some of what Brian wrote. On being received at Richmond, those of the Roman Catholic persuasion were placed by head matron Mrs. Rawlins under the spiritual care of prison chaplain Father Bernard Kirby, a zealous and consummate Irish priest. Father Kirby wasted no time in praying with the women and exhorting them to individually confess their sins, make their penance, and receive absolution and forgiveness from God for the crimes which had brought them to their present predicament. Friday the 23rd of July saw the little chapel at the penitentiary fitted up with much taste and neatness and presenting a most interesting spectacle. The altar was decorated with a profusion of flowers and other ornaments. The 2 large galleries were occupied by the ordinary prisoners of the establishment. However, underneath the galleries, maintaining a contrite, meek and pious congregation, were quietly assembled the convicts in their sombre dress. Father Kirby then entreated the convicts that they should rejoice at being transported to Australia, a much better land than where they currently lived. He told them the story of a skillful gardener. When inspecting his plants, he would, if he saw them growing too closely together, transplant a portion of them into another soil in order that they all might flourish and produce an abundant crop, while if he left them in their present state, they would grow weak and sickly. So it was with his female convicts. To save them from a fearful fate, God had permitted the hand of the law to reach them. He allowed the judge to sentence them to transportation to a foreign clime, where they would have the opportunity of returning to the paths of virtue by the grace of repentance, thus becoming prosperous and happy. With such a prospect before them, had they any reason to weep or lament for their destiny? No, on the contrary, they should rejoice at the potential which was ahead of them. Now, while I admire Father Kirby's enthusiasm for the women, and maybe some romanticism there, I only wish that Anne had found prosperity and happiness in her new land. Many, many women did not. And sadly, Anne's fate proved to be quite the opposite also. Huge winds drove the Mexborough out to sea over those final few days until she sailed into the Derwent River on the 26th of December after 4 months and 2 weeks at sea. Dr. Hampton reported to the authorities that apart from the 2 fatal cases, the convict women were in better health and condition than they were on embarkation at Kingstown, and none were under or required medical treatment. In his reports on their behaviour, he listed only 3 women who were bad and troublesome, another 16 were middling, and the majority, the remaining 124 women, were well behaved, including Anne, who received a good surgeon's report. Now, upon arrival, Anne was described as 5 foot 2.5 inches tall, fresh complexion, light brown hair, grey eyes, and she was deeply pickpotted. Anne was likely taken to the Cascades Female Factory in Hobart to await assignment. Her first assignment was with the Brown family in Launceston. In February 1842, Anne was charged with insolence, and she received 6 days solitary confinement at the Female Factory in Launceston. Anne was put into second class. Female convicts were classified into 3 distinct groups based on behaviour and status. The second class, also known as the probationary class, was made up of women who had either committed minor infractions or had shown improvement after serving time in crime class, which was third class. Life in the second class was marginally better than in crime class. Inmates performed lighter labour such as spinning, weaving and sewing, and they were housed in Yard 2, a space that also served as a site for certain punishments. If they maintained a good conduct over their probationary period, typically 3 to 6 months, they could be promoted to the first class and become eligible for assignment. However, by 1842, the factory was overcrowded with more than 250 women crammed into a facility designed for fewer than half that number, making it difficult to enforce the class distinctions and undermining the intended reformative structure. By March 1843, Anne had been assigned to the Walford family, but was soon accused of being absent without leave. As punishment, she was sentenced to a further 6 days in solitary confinement at the Launceston Female Factory. It was around this time that Anne met her future husband, fellow convict William Broom. Originally from Gurney Slade in Somerset, England, William had been transported to Van Diemen's Land in 1833 on the Atlas at the age of 20, following a conviction for burglary. He was a tailor by trade, and he was described as 5 foot 11 inches, so he was notably tall. He had a fair complexion, brown hair, and hazel eyes. Now, William had a rather colourful convict conduct record, and I will go into the details because it might explain his behaviour in the coming years, maybe. William was initially assigned to a Mr. Robertson, and in June 1834 he was punished for neglect of duty and being absent without leave. He received 48 hours in a cell on bread and water. On the 7th of January 1835, he was caught admitting 2 women of ill repute into his master's premises and was sentenced to 25 lashes. The following month, he was admonished for being on Mr. Clancy's property without permission. In April, he was found out after hours, accompanied by 2 fellow servants, in direct disobedience of his master's orders, earning him another 25 lashes for the offence. In June, he was again punished with 1 month's imprisonment for being absent without permission and returning home after hours. After serving his sentence, he was returned to his master, Mr. Robertson. In February of 1836, William was repeatedly absent without leave, and he received 50 lashes and hard labour in chains for 3 months. In August, he was caught trying to pawn a brooch, after which he was assigned to the interior. Now, a term commonly used to indicate placement in the more remote rural regions of Van Diemen's Land, rather than working in the towns or coastal settlements. Convicts assigned in the interior were typically sent to farms, homesteads, or probation stations scattered throughout the colony's inland districts. Life in these areas was often harsh and isolated, with limited oversight from colonial authorities and few opportunities for social interaction or support. Work was physically demanding and could include agricultural labour, shepherding, or road building. In September, William was again absent for 2 days and nights without leave, and as punishment, he was sentenced to 3 months of hard labour in the chain gang, and it was ordered that he not be returned to his master. Now here's a map of the Bendigo cemetery, and if you can see, it's just to the right. I've tried to show you with a stick. I've got no idea why I did that, but so the front part at Carpenter Street up to the right is the oldest part of the cemetery, and that's the part we'll be exploring today. In August 1837, William was assigned to a Mr. McRae in the Rest Down area, where he once again absconded and was punished with 25 lashes. A year later, he was charged with insolence, disobedience of orders, and being absent without leave, clearly indicating ongoing difficulties during his time with McRae, well, really during all of his assignments by the sounds of it. This time he received a sentence of 12 months hard labour, and it was recommended that he be sent to Port Arthur. Now, a male convict would be sent to Port Arthur if he was considered a reoffender, unmanageable, or had committed a serious crime after arriving in the colony. Port Arthur, located on the Tasman Peninsula, was one of the most notorious penal settlements in Van Diemen's Land, and by the mid-1830s it had become the main site for secondary punishment, a place where convicts who had already been transported were sent for further discipline. Convicts sent to Port Arthur were often those who had escaped from their original assignment, repeatedly disobeyed orders, or committed thefts, being involved in violence or insubordination, or if they'd proven themselves resistant to reform. Once there, they were subjected to a strict regime of hard labour, including timber cutting, shipbuilding, and stone quarrying. The settlement was designed to be both isolating and reformative, with increasing use of psychological punishment, such as solitary confinement and silence, alongside physical discipline. Port Arthur was also heavily fortified and geographically remote, making escape nearly impossible. These images were taken during my visit to Port Arthur in 2021. Now, if you ever have the opportunity to go, it is well worth the trip. Port Arthur is a place of striking beauty, yet it also bears the weight of deep tragedy. It stands as one of the most significant sites in our nation's history. In April 1840, William was reprimanded for stealing a government axe, and a few months later was charged with possessing a quantity of potatoes for which he could not account. He received 36 lashes for the offence. In July, he was punished again, this time with 20 lashes, for working privately as a tailor, so it's possible he had a side gig mending fellow convicts' clothing at Port Arthur, despite it being against regulations. Oh well, good on him. He was finally granted his ticket of leave in May 1843, but not long after he found himself back in jail in Launceston, sentenced to 1 month of hard labour for insolence and neglect of duty. One can't help but wonder how much William's experiences, 181 lashes, months in chain gangs and years at Port Arthur shaped his behaviour in later life, particularly towards his family. I mean, he was no angel to begin with, but the relentless punishment, isolation and harsh discipline he endured would have left deep psychological scars. For many men, such treatment broke their spirit or hardened them in ways that echoed long after their sentences ended. It's possible that these years of suffering influenced how William related to those closest to him, for better or worse. In November 1843, Anne and William were given permission to marry. They were married 3 months later in Evandale. Evandale is a town 20 kilometres south of Launceston. While William was free to find work, Anne was still under assignment. In February of 1845, Anne received her ticket of leave, which would have given her the freedom to find paid work. A year later, she is working for the Bacon family. During her time with the Bacon family, she only had one misdemeanour, and that was a reprimand for being drunk. Now, in January 1848, she was finally freed by servitude, meaning she had completed her transportation sentence. In July of the same year, William received a conditional pardon. A conditional pardon granted a male convict significant freedom within Van Diemen's Land, though with important restrictions. It released him from direct government control, allowing him to live and work independently, seek employment and participate in colonial society. However, the pardon came with a key condition. He was not permitted to leave the colony, particularly to return to Britain. Violating this condition could result in rearrest and further punishment. For many convicts, a conditional pardon marked a major step toward rehabilitation and reintegration, especially for those serving life sentences who had demonstrated good behaviour over time. In September 1849, Anne gave birth to her first child in Launceston, a son they named Patrick. Sadly, Patrick lived for only 2 months. 3 years later, Anne and William were still living in or near Launceston, where Anne gave birth to a daughter, who they named Anne. For reasons unknown, a friend of Anne's named Bridget Moody reported the birth to the authorities, providing the detail that Anne's maiden name was Smith. Now, I found no other records of Anne using the surname Smith, but it's possible the couple had adopted new names to conceal their convict pasts. At the time, William was working as a tailor. Tragically, just 3 weeks later, young Anne passed away, having suffered from convulsions. Sometime after this, Anne and William relocated to the colony of Victoria. With gold having been discovered and perhaps still grieving the loss of their children, they may have been seeking a fresh start in a new place. The couple eventually made their way to the Bendigo diggings, where Anne gave birth to her 3rd child in 1856, a son named Alexander. Sadly, Alexander died just a month later. A year later, Anne gave birth to another son, William, and I'm pleased to report that he survived. Around 1863, Anne gave birth to a daughter named Mary, who also survived. Now, the Female Factory Research Centre lists 2 additional children for Anne, a Thomas and another William. However, I've been unable to locate birth records for either of these boys, or for Mary for that matter. Despite this, we know with certainty that Mary existed, as her heartbreaking testimony at her mother's inquest will soon reveal. Anne and her children remained in Bendigo, while William was frequently in and out of jail. In her book Vandemonians, Janet McCalman writes of the family. Most poignant of all was the end of Anne Ward, who, after a riotous time on the goldfields, was abandoned by her husband William Broom. She has syphilis and tuberculosis and lived with her youngest child Mary, aged 10, in a hut at Back Creek. I'm unsure where Janet sourced the claim that Anne had a riotous time on the goldfields. If you have more information about that, please share it in the comments, because I can find no evidence that she had any kind of riotous time. Now, in 1863, the year Mary was born, William was sentenced to 6 months in jail for stealing a quantity of canvas and maliciously damaging private property. Just a year later, he received a 5-year sentence for sheep stealing, and I believe this helps explain how Anne came to be involved in prostitution. Left as a single mother without a husband to support the family she had, few options available to her. Sadly, there was no Centrelink back then. What a tragedy. William would have been released from jail by 1869, assuming no further charges were laid against him, and it appears he didn't return to Anne. Had he heard about the work she'd been forced into, or perhaps he never intended to go back to his wife, instead choosing to join the loggers near Mount Macedon? Sadly, we'll never know. This left Anne and Mary to endure their miserable circumstances until that fateful night in 1873. An inquest into Anne's death was held at the Royal Oak Hotel at Back Creek in Bendigo on the 24th of March 1873. There were 12 male jurors and 12 witnesses, and it was believed that Anne had died sometime between 5 and 9 p.m. on the evening of the 21st of March. She had been in bed with her daughter Mary Broom. The first witness was Dr. Harry Lee Atkinson. He examined the body and could see no signs of violence externally on her body, although she was very thin and some 50 years old in appearance. She was 49 years old. He found both lungs congested with tuberculosis and her kidneys were diseased. Anne's official cause of death was tuberculosis disease of the lungs, accelerated by want of proper nourishment and exposure to cold nights in her miserable hut. The second witness was 10-year-old Mary Broom, the only surviving daughter of Annie Broom. Anne is referred to as Annie throughout the inquest. At the time of her mother's death, Mary had been living with her in the hut on Kennedy Street, Back Creek. The information revealed through Mary's testimony is invaluable. We learn from Mary's account that she and her mother had been living alone in the hut for some time. Mary had 3 brothers, George, the eldest, followed by John and William. I have been unable to locate birth certificates for either George or John. According to the 1903 census, George, John and Thomas were all living together in Turner Street, Eagle Hawk. George is listed as a carter, while John and Thomas are recorded as minors. This raises the question, was Thomas George's son and Annie's grandson? If you know anything more about the Broom family or their descendants, please leave a comment to let us all know. I believe Anne and Mary's hut was somewhere here between the creek and the railway line. So just in front of the Mitre 10 buildings there with that dirt, the little rise there, that is the railway line. And then the creek is, as you can see, down there. So I believe somewhere on that green patch of grass there was where the hut was. And look, there may have been other huts as well. It was definitely probably a slum area of Bendigo at the time in 1873, and it is not a place you would have wanted to live. The best thing for me to do is to read Mary's testimony as it has been transcribed, so I don't confuse everyone with too much detail. This is what she said. George is married and living in Eagle Hawk. He is the oldest. John is the second. I don't know where he is. And William the third is minding cattle about Lake Cooper. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with country Victoria, Lake Cooper is out near Colbinaban and Corop. It would have been quite remote in 1873. Mary continues, I don't know who supported Mother. She said she got it from Brother George. I don't know how many days she has been sick in bed during that time. She only had soup yesterday from a neighbour, Mrs. Finnane. The other days my mother only had some grapes and a little bread. Mrs. Finnane used to give me something to eat since Mother got sick. God bless Mrs. Finnane. I used to prevent people from coming in at night. Now there will be more about that horror of a comment later. About 5 o'clock yesterday evening, Mother was lying in bed covered by clothes. I asked her to say Mary, my name, but she could hardly say it. I sat on the little box without it might have said coat or covering, but I can't quite read the writing, or any fire until about 7 o'clock, and then went to bed next to the wall beyond Mother. I spoke to Mother after the Echuca train had passed, but I got no answer and thought she was asleep. I went to sleep, but before that, Constable Rogers came to look for a man. Still, I thought Mother was asleep, and I slept until daylight this morning. After Constable Rogers left, I spoke to Mother and shook her. Now, it would have been nice if Constable Rogers had done his job and maybe checked, but anyway. And by the morning light, I saw she was dead. I went and told Mrs. Finnane. She was frightened to come over. She had brought soup to my mother yesterday afternoon before 5 o'clock and then bid me come to her house where I had my supper. I brought no drinks to Mother while sick in bed, and I believe Mary means alcohol here. A woman brought her 1 shilling worth of port wine overnight. Mother was in bed last Sunday the 16th. I was not at school but at home all this week. No one but Mrs. Finnane brought anything to Mother while sick in bed. She could not use the soup, nor had she any tea or hot drinks. There was no one but me to attend to her those days. She did not ask for anything. Constable Thomas Rogers was witness number 3. He said that he and a man named McNamara had gone to the hut to search for a man who had stolen blankets from McNamara's. Rogers said that he had found the door to the hut closed only by a stick laid up against it inside. There is but one room there, having no furniture except the bed. I moved the stick and entered, getting no answer to my calls. In the bed, I saw the deceased lying across the bed, her feet out. McNamara struck a light, and then I found the girl, Mary Broom, in the bed next to the wall. She said to my call, "I am here." I asked, "Is there no person living in this hut but you?" The girl answered, "Yes, my mother is here with me, in the bed asleep." Rogers thought Anne was drunk. He said by then it was blowing hard outside and cold, and on leaving I told the little girl not to get out of bed and that I would replace the stick against the door. She said, "No, I'll get up and fasten it, for the wind might blow the door in." Rogers continued, "I am aware that the place is a bad one, and anywhere we would search for stolen things. I cannot tell whether deceased was alive then. She was covered up by the bedclothes, and I felt she was drunk and that the child did not like to say so." How terrifying for young Mary to be living in such conditions, with only a stick that she put against the door so that men couldn't come in. There would have been many men that knew Anne worked from the hut down at Back Creek, so men could have been coming, and there's testimony to say men were coming at all times of the night. And I'm not sure where Mary was at this time, but it's really horrifying to think. The next witness was their caring neighbour, Catherine Finnane. Catherine was married to a woodcarter named Edward. This is her testimony. "I live near the hut of the deceased Annie Broom. I knew her there for over 3 or 4 years. I do not know how she lived, but the place was frequented by bad people day and night. She had not been out, I believe, for the last 3 weeks. Her daughter Mary, the last witness, 10 years old, told me last Thursday that the mother was very bad, meaning she was sick. I went there with some soup to deliver, but she did not then take it. She seemed a little, I couldn't quite read that word, and she believed she had been then in the hospital. I was never in there but that time. I did not like going there. This morning I heard Mary crying, and I called her asking if her mother was dead, and she said she was. I gave Mary her breakfast and I bid her send word to the police. I cannot say anyone attended to the deceased, for the neighbours did not like going near the place. She used to drink off and on, and when she could. I used to give Mary food. I did not like seeing her hungry. No one lived there but Mary and her mother. It was indeed a cold, miserable place. There seemed nothing there but their bed." The next witness was a police constable named John Clark, and his testimony further illuminates the appalling conditions and circumstances in which Anne and Mary were living. "I have known the deceased, Anne Broom, since I was first placed in charge here 8 months ago. She was a prostitute. I have heard that her husband had left her and is at Carlshrew at the Hanging Rock. This morning at 8:45, a girl, Christina Patterson, came to this station and informed me of deceased death. I went to her hut where this jury have viewed her dead, and there I found her at the bed with her feet out, and in the same position this jury has seen her body." So that's weird, isn't it? All 12 of the jury went to the hut on the day she died to view her body. Was that the usual practice back then? Let us know in the comments if you know more. Constable John continues, "There was no one but the daughter Mary there, who seems a nice, intelligent girl of some 10 years old. I saw no appearance of any furniture, fire or food in the place. I always found it so. And I never saw her except in drink," meaning he never saw Anne unless she was drunk. Now this was a grave I was not expecting to find, and I was quite excited when I saw it. This is the grave of Mrs. Finnane, Catherine Finnane, and her husband Edward, the kind, caring lady who fed Anne and Mary and basically was probably watching out for the pair. The Finnane descendants can be very proud of their ancestor, and it looks like they've gotten together and had a new headstone done for the grave. And it says here, like Edward Finnane, first known Finnane in Australia, and his spouse Catherine Daly. So they were Irish migrants, and they had quite a number of descendants who probably are still around Bendigo. And that was erected in 2022. What a fantastic find. I was very excited. I have been unable to locate an official death record or burial site for Anne. However, I believe she is most likely buried at the Bendigo Cemetery, formerly known as the Back Creek Cemetery and also referred to as the Sandhurst Cemetery, reflecting Bendigo's earlier name. There is a possibility that she was buried at Whitehill Cemetery in the area known as Pauper's Paddock, but I lean more towards Back Creek Cemetery. Historically, pauper patients from the Bendigo Hospital and the Bendigo Benevolent Asylum were buried at White Hills for a fee of £1, following an agreement between the hospital and the cemetery. However, as Anne died at home in her hut at Back Creek, I believe it is more likely that she was buried locally at the Back Creek Cemetery in an unmarked pauper's grave, likely here where I have the flowers in the older section. If you know the whereabouts of Anne's final resting place, please leave a comment to let us know. So you may be wondering what became of young Mary. I wonder why Mary couldn't stay with one of her brothers. Did they even know their mother had died and that Mary was in need of help? There are so many unanswered questions. I would suggest they did know, as the incident was widely reported throughout the colony under the headline, "A Wretched Death." It's hard to imagine that such a public and tragic event wouldn't have reached them. I found the articles about Anne quite disrespectful and confronting. To be honest, they went into unnecessary detail about her autopsy and her profession, and I felt it was a great indignity to a woman who had already endured so much. The tone lacked compassion, and instead of honouring her life, it seemed to sensationalise her suffering. The Bendigo Advertiser published a report on Monday the 24th of March 1973 on page 2, under the heading "A Wretched Death." The article detailed the inquest proceedings, including witness statements and the post-mortem findings. It concluded with the following: the cause of death was tubercular disease of the lungs, accelerated by lack of proper nourishment and exposure to cold nights in her miserable hut. The jury returned a verdict in identical terms, adding the words "the result of dissipation," meaning overindulgence, and drunkenness. How heartbreaking. From the records, we know that Mary became a ward of the state and was placed into an industrial school. She was initially committed to the institution for 3 years for neglect. She was most likely placed in the Sandhurst Industrial School, which operated within the grounds of the Bendigo Benevolent Asylum. Established in 1868 under the Neglected and Criminal Children's Act in 1864. The school was designed to provide care, education and training for children deemed neglected or at risk. Unlike many other industrial schools in Victoria, Sandhurst was managed locally by a committee, which allowed for more community oversight and was considered a strength of the institution. At its peak in 1872, the school housed 147 girls, though it later transitioned to a boys-only facility before closing in 1885. The children were taught basic literacy and numeracy, as well as practical skills intended to prepare them for employment. Mary's admission record provides some insight into her circumstances. Her health was reported as good, although she was found in a half-nude state at the time of admission. She was recorded as Roman Catholic, illiterate, and had been vaccinated against smallpox. Under the section Parents Living, the following details were noted. Father, believed to be residing either in Kyneton or at Hanging Rock, would end. A warrant was issued and he has previously received a 5-year sentence for sheep stealing. Mother deceased. In April 1873, William was brought before the Sandhurst Petty Sessions on a charge of deserting his child, Mary Broom, and leaving her without means of support. The outcome was a reconnaissance of support for £20, along with a letter from a Reverend McCulloch. It's unclear whether the Reverend was vouching for William or acting as a liaison for the industrial school. Probably a liaison, to be honest. It appears William paid the school £20 to contribute towards Mary's care. 2 months later, William was brought before the Lancefield Petty Sessions to show cause why an order should not be made for him to support his child. However, the order was postponed as the department noted that one had already been issued by the Sandhurst bench. Does this mean William had not come forward with the money? Unfortunately, I've been unable to locate any further records on the matter. I've been able to access a family tree on Ancestry that records William as having died in Kilmore in 1887, and Mary going on to marry, raise a family and live near Kilmore herself. There's also a really lovely photo of an older Mary, and it's heartening to think she may have found happiness after such a difficult start to life. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been able to verify the accuracy of the information, or even if I have the right Mary and William. But if anyone knows more, we'd love to hear from you in the comments if you feel that's something you'd like to do. Anne Ward's life ended in obscurity, but her story, painful, raw, and deeply human, deserves to be remembered. She was one of thousands of women transported to Australia under the weight of poverty and punishment, and like many, she faced a lifetime of hardship. Her final years spent in a crumbling hut with her daughter Mary reflect the brutal reality of life for many former convicts who were left behind by society. Mary's testimony at her mother's inquest is one of the most poignant records we have, a child's voice, clear and brave, speaking truth in the face of tragedy. Her resilience, even in the darkest of circumstances, is a testament to the strength passed down from her mother. Though Mary was placed in an industrial school, there is hope in the possibility that she went on to live a full life, marry and raise a family of her own. If the family tree is accurate, then perhaps after all she endured, Mary found peace. Anne Ward's story is not just a footnote in Australia's convict history, it is a mirror reflecting the lives of countless women whose names are lost to time, women who were punished, silenced and forgotten. But through stories like Anne's, we reclaim their voices, we honour their struggles, and we ensure that their lives are not reduced to headlines like a wretched death, but remembered as part of the complex, painful, and extraordinary foundation of this country. May Anne Ward rest in peace, and may Mary's legacy live on, and may we continue to uncover and share the stories of those who came before us, so they are never forgotten, especially the lives woven into the fabric of Australia's extraordinary convict history.